Celeste Boudreau stepped onto the cracked slate path of her grandmother's Uptown home, the late summer heat wrapping around her like an unwelcome embrace. Spanish moss swayed like ghostly fingers from the oaks overhead. Her heels clicked against the stone as she approached the front door, key trembling slightly in her hand. Grandma Sabina had passed 6 weeks earlier, and the will had left Celeste the house and the apothecary shop on Magazine Street. Her sister Claudette hadn't spoken a word to her since. The scent of dried lavender and myrrh greeted her as she crossed the threshold, the same smell that had clung to Grandma Sabina's robes. The home hadn't changed much. Wooden floors creaked like a welcome and a protest. The same photos lined the hallway, generations of Boudreau women staring out through time, eyes sharp. Celeste felt their gaze. Even now, Celeste had spent the last 10 years drifting. Paris, Tulum, Accra, places where no one knew her name, where she could write poetry and mix oils in peace. But when Sabina died, the pull home was strong and immediate. It wasn't just grief. Something had summoned her. Her first night, Celeste lit white candles, placed water and rum on the old altar. A prayer murmured to the ancestors, but something felt off, leaving her unsettled. The dreams started that night. She walked through a swamp under a blood-orange moon. Crows screamed overhead. Something moved in the water. When she looked down, her reflection wore Claudette's face, smiling. Celeste woke in a cold sweat. The gris-gris bag under her pillow, stitched years ago by Sabina herself, was torn clean down the middle. The red thread hung limp. By day, Celeste reopened the Botanica, Sabina's apothecary, tucked between a po' boy shop and a nail salon as if hidden in plain sight. Locals came by out of curiosity. Some whispered about her being the granddaughter who left, but Celeste was kind, measured, and magnetic. They may have gossiped, but they always returned. She sold teas for sleep, tinctures for sorrow, herbs to coax back wayward lovers. She never advertised her roots in the tradition, not openly, not yet. Then, one humid afternoon, Claudette showed up.
"Cute shop,"
she said, arms folded as she stepped across the threshold. Celeste froze with a mason jar of blue vervain in her hands.
"Didn't think you'd stop by."
Claudette shrugged. She looked good, lipstick too red, dress too tight, smile too smug. "Thought I'd see how our inheritance was coming along."
"Mine, actually. It's what the will said."
Claudette's smile faltered for a second. "Of course. Grandma always did have a soft spot for you, her precious little seer." The air crackled between them. They hadn't been close since they were girls. Celeste, the golden child, creative, playful, and intuitive. Claudette, the clever one, sharp-tongued and shadowed. Celeste saw things. Claudette studied them. One gifted, the other grinding, and neither of them ever forgot which was which. Celeste looked down to rearrange jars.
"You need anything?"
Claudette glanced around, eyes narrowing at the altar behind the register. Just browsing. After Claudette left, Celeste noticed a feather, black and oily, had fallen onto the doormat. She bent to pick it up, but something about it made her hand stop short. That night, the dreams returned, the swamp again, but this time her hands were tied and the crows circled lower. The next morning, Marc Delacroix walked into the shop. Celeste nearly dropped her mug.
"Hey, Sally."
He said, voice low and slick as ever.
"Heard you were back in town?"
Marc, her ex-husband, a man with a smile like sweet tea and eyes that could lie in 3 languages. She hadn't seen him since before the divorce. 10 years, maybe more. He looked exactly the same. She steadied her breath.
"What do you want?"
He lifted both hands.
"Peace, maybe a fresh start."
Celeste arched a brow.
"That's rich."
I mean it, we've both changed.
He glanced around.
This place suits you, I miss this side of you.
Celeste said nothing. What she didn't know was that Claudette sat across the street in a black SUV watching through the dark-tinted glass. One hand rested on a worn leather pouch in her lap. Her nails tapped against the lid of a jar filled with graveyard dirt and snakeskin. Claudette watched Marc exit the shop and slide into the passenger seat of her SUV like a man who hadn't just committed treason. She leaned over and kissed him hard, lips tasting of bourbon and envy.
"Did she take the bait?"
Marc smirked.
Of course she did.
He felt mildly insulted by the question. Claudette's laugh was dry. "She thinks she's so clever, floating through Paris on your dime while I was here cleaning up after Grandma, watching her die." Marc's heart shuddered a little at the comment. He didn't want to acknowledge the truth aloud. He wouldn't have a business if it hadn't been for Celeste. She had the ideas, the confidence, and the contacts. He just had the hands to do the manual labor until they could afford to hire workers. Celeste had the vision. Mark glanced sideways.
You sure this is the way?
She deserves it, all of it. Claudette pressed the pouch into his hands. Keep this on you, it'll keep her vision cloudy. She didn't tell him what was inside. He wouldn't understand the power in bones scraped from a dead cat and stitched with hair pulled from Celeste's own comb. Her spells had grown potent in the years Celeste ran from her birthright. Claudette hadn't run. She had stayed, she had studied, and she had waited. The next time Celeste saw Mark was at Gumbo Fest in Armstrong Park. She hadn't planned to go, but Miss Lena, who ran the shop next door, insisted she get out of the house.
Girl, you need to eat something that don't come from a jar and get seen.
So she went, found a quiet spot under the oaks to eat a bowl of chicken and sausage gumbo and a frozen daiquiri. Music pulsed through the trees. People danced and shouted greetings across the lawn. It was good to see black folks laughing, living, glowing. She wasn't 2 bites into her food when she heard his voice.
Well, damn, you still eat like you don't plan on sharing.
Celeste looked up. Mark, holding a bowl of gumbo and a beer, was smiling like they were just 2 old friends at a reunion. She narrowed her eyes.
You following me now?
I live 3 blocks away. Everybody in the city's here, Celeste. Chill.
He knew she didn't want him there, but sat anyway. They made awkward conversation, but he didn't press. He didn't flirt. He told her about his new contracting business, his efforts to stay out of trouble. Then he gave her the cornbread from his plate. Her favorite, he remembered. She didn't smile. She didn't eat the cornbread. But she didn't leave either. A few days later, Mark showed up at the shop again. Celeste was reaching for a jar of white sage from a high shelf. The step stool had wobbled once already, and she didn't trust it.
You really gonna risk your ankle for that?
She turned to see him in the doorway.
I'm fine.
She reached again. The jar tipped. Mark was at her side before it fell, steadying her by the waist with one hand and catching the jar with the other. For a moment they were close, too close. His cologne hit her nose, not the same one he used to wear, subtler, more mature. She stepped back.
Thanks.
No problem, I saw the door open, thought I'd check in.
You're checking in a lot lately.
He held up a bag.
Brought you beignets.
She blinked. She took the bag, warm, powdery, just right. They sat, talked. He asked about the herbs, the altar, her dreams. He seemed interested, genuine. She told herself to be cautious. But that afternoon, when he laughed at something she said and she laughed back, really laughed, it felt like old music rising from the cracks in the floor. That night, her nose bled onto the pillow. The next morning, her favorite crystal shattered on the windowsill. The gris-gris bag she had sewn with fresh basil and salt turned black. I need to call Tante Vivienne, Celeste thought. She'd almost said it aloud, but instinct kept her mouth closed. You never know who or what is listening. Meanwhile, Claudette kept working. The more Celeste opened herself to Mark, the more Claudette pulled energy from her. She buried dolls dressed in Celeste's worn scarves at crossroads. She whispered incantations under the floorboards of the old house when Celeste was out. She called the life insurance agent pretending to be Celeste, filled out change of address forms, and checked balances. The policy was still active. Mark was still the beneficiary. Soon, Claudette thought, smiling to herself. Celeste hadn't touched her cards in weeks. Each time she tried, something stopped her. First a headache, then a shaking in her hands, then a terrible fatigue that seemed to deepen by the day. Her skin had gone sallow, her eyes sunken. Even her voice felt like it echoed from far away. One morning, after a night of especially brutal dreams, visions of being dragged through a swamp by a faceless figure cloaked in shadow, Celeste stumbled into the bathroom and froze. In the mirror, for a split second, her reflection bore a grotesque mask of death. Hollow cheeks, clouded eyes, and lips sewn shut. But even more disturbing was the figure behind her, blurred, obscured by a veil of shadow. She couldn't make out the face. It shifted, flickered, wore the shape of someone she didn't know or maybe had forgotten. A stranger with familiar eyes. She screamed and blinked, and the vision vanished like steam from the mirror. That afternoon, as she locked up the shop early, Miss Lena from the nail salon next door called out,
Baby, you look like somebody done wrung you out. You need rest. Go lay down before you fall out in that street.
Celeste forced a smile but said nothing. The spirits were closing in. She lit the altar candles that evening with trembling fingers. Maybe it was fear, maybe something worse. Finally, she pulled the cards from their silk pouch and laid them gently before her. Death, Tower, 10 of Swords.
I see you?
She whispered into the shadows, and the shadows whispered back. Tante Vivienne arrived just after dusk, stepping through Celeste's front door without knocking. No one ever remembered giving Tante a key, but she always had one. She wore a white head wrap, layers of flowing linen, and the scent of rum and cloves. Her bangles clinked as she moved through the house, pausing to glance at the altar before speaking.
You been sleeping with your doors open, girl?
Celeste nodded slowly.
I didn't mean to.
But you did.
Vivienne briefly stood at the altar and then walked to the table and passed her hand over the cards still lying there. She hissed softly.
You got death around you, but it ain't yours, not yet. Somebody's been working you from a place of envy and blood, and you know who.
Celeste whispered.
Claudette.
The name felt foreign on her tongue, like saying it might summon something she wasn't ready to face. Celeste shook her head slightly, eyes brimming.
No, I mean, we were never close, but she's my sister. We played under the same trees, shared the same spoon when we were little. I protected her. I held her secrets. How could she...
Her voice cracked.
How could she want me gone?
Tante Vivienne looked up, sharp.
You said it, not me.
Celeste felt hollow.
She was always angry, but this, why now?
She wants what you got, and not just the shop, your gift, your light. She thinks if you die, maybe she'll shine brighter.
Tante shook her head.
But it doesn't work that way. You can't take light from a soul born with it.
I've been so tired, I haven't been able to fight.
You ain't supposed to fight. You're supposed to cleanse, protect, call back what's yours. That's what Sabina taught you, or tried to.
Vivienne pulled out a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Inside, black salt, Florida water, a new gris-gris bag, and a vial of oil that shimmered silver under the light.
We gon' wake the bones.
She said.
Tonight.
That night they worked under the full moon. Candles at the four corners of the yard, salt circles. Celeste bathed in herbs and prayed aloud. Tante chanted in an older tongue. The air thickened. Shadows danced. As the final candle burned low, Celeste looked up. And she saw clearly. Not a vision, not a dream. A memory, not hers, Claudette's. Claudette, standing in her bedroom months ago when Celeste was still in Paris, admiring herself in a mirror, dressed in Celeste's robe, plucking strands of hair from her brush and slipping them into a pouch. She spoke words into a cracked mirror, voice laced with venom. Then the image shifted, Claudette walking barefoot across a dusty floor, stepping into candlelight, reaching up to pull Mark into a kiss that was too familiar, too easy. His face surfaced through the haze, eyes closed, hands on her waist. Celeste's stomach turned. That was the night she woke with a fever so bad she'd nearly called an ambulance. Now she understood why. Celeste fell back from the circle, breath stolen.
She's been feeding on me for months.
Tante Vivienne nodded.
But now you see, now you can end it.
Celeste shook.
She won't stop, you know. She'll keep coming.
Then let her come.
Tante said.
Let her walk right into the fire she built.
Celeste looked down at her hands. Hands that once held her baby sisters when they crossed streets, when they whispered secrets in the dark. A dull ache bloomed in her chest.
I never wanted this. I just wanted to come home, make things right somehow, but she won't accept that. She wants my ashes, not peace.
Tante Vivienne placed a firm hand on her shoulder.
Peace ain't always gentle. Sometimes it comes through reckoning.
Celeste's hands stopped trembling.
I want to trap her, and him.
Tante said.
Then we'll need bones and something sweeter than death.
What's sweeter than death?
Justice.
Tante said, eyes glinting.
Justice, child?
3 days later, Celeste rose before dawn. She dressed in white linen, just as Grandma Sabina had taught her. Her hair was wrapped in a silver scarf, and her face was bare. No armor, no mask. She swept the apothecary before opening laid-out bundles of rosemary, cassia bark, and rue. She cleaned the altar, lit new candles, and beneath the counter, she set the trap. It wasn't physical. It was spiritual. A small jar with pieces of a broken mirror on the inside. It held a small figure made of bones ground to dust, wax seals etched with veves, and honey tied with a knot of twine soaked in sewer water. Tante Vivienne called it a mirror jar. Anything Claudette sent would return to her tenfold. That afternoon, Mark dropped by.
You look well today?
He said, eyeing her cautiously. Celeste smiled. Her voice was soft and unreadable.
I feel like myself again.
He reached out and brushed a piece of lint from her shoulder.
I've been thinking, maybe we could really talk about everything.
Sure, come back after close. I'll make tea.
Mark nodded, turned, and walked out into the heat. Across the street, Claudette waited in the SUV. Celeste didn't need to see her. She could feel her. As the last slant of sun painted the walls gold that evening, Celeste prepared the tea and lit white candles. Claudette entered the shop first. She looked radiant, black dress, gold earrings, poison in her eyes.
Sister?
She said. Celeste stood behind the counter.
Claudette.
They stared at one another, two mirrors, one cracked.
You knew I'd come.
Celeste nodded.
I set the table for 3.
Mark entered quietly, the door chime barely making a sound. Celeste didn't flinch.
You can both sit or stand. Either way, this ends tonight.
Claudette scoffed.
You think you can outwork me?
Celeste said, voice calm.
I already did.
She lit a match and dropped it into a small bowl of dried herbs. The flames leapt green, then blue, then vanished. Mark swayed on his feet.
What was that?
The truth.
Celeste said.
Coming to call.
The shop darkened, not from the setting sun but from something heavier. Claudette reached into her bag, but her hand froze. She couldn't move.
I didn't bind you.
Celeste whispered.
You bound yourself.
Claudette's mouth opened, but no sound came. Mark staggered back toward the door, but Tante Vivian stood there now, arms folded.
No one leaves till the spirits are done,
she said. The air filled with low hums, voices not of the living. The candles flickered wildly and the altar glowed.
You sent sickness.
Celeste said, stepping forward.
You stole. You lied. You called death to my door.
She turned to Mark.
And you helped her.
He looked at the floor.
It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought we could scare you, just push you out. Claudette said...
Don't say my name.
Claudette shrieked, her voice suddenly freed. The candle flames jumped, then the spirits came. First, the air grew thick and warm, humming like a swarm of bees behind a veil. Shapes began to move beyond the glow, tall, veiled ancestors in white, faces obscured, eyes glowing soft gold. They circled the room in silence, carrying the scent of river water and grave dirt. Behind them came something else, darker, lower to the ground, slinking like smoke. Spirits twisted by pain and envy, drawn to the ritual like flies to honey. Not evil exactly, just angry, hungry, waiting for what was owed. Tante Vivian stepped forward and placed the jar on the floor between them. Inside, the remains of the honeyed knot, now hardened like resin.
This holds the truth,
she said.
And the price.
The air shuddered. Claudette screamed. Mark fell to his knees, eyes wide, as though he saw every mistake he'd ever made come back in living color. The light returned. It was over. Celeste stood in the stillness that followed, the air thick with incense and echoes. She moved behind the counter and retrieved a locked tin box from beneath the floorboards. Inside were copies of the forged insurance documents, bank transfers with Mark's name on them, and a burner phone Claudette had once left behind in her haste. She handed the box to Tante Vivian.
You know who to call,
Celeste said, her voice flat but clear. Vivian nodded.
Already done.
The police arrived an hour later, tipped off anonymously about the evidence. Mark hung his head as he was handcuffed, not bothering to speak or look at Celeste. Claudette didn't say a word as they took her away, but her eyes never left Celeste's. In her eyes, no hate, no love, just the hollow where sisterhood once lived. The apothecary was quiet again. Weeks had passed since the spirits came, and the truth was laid bare. Celeste walked barefoot across the cool wooden floor, the scent of fresh sage and frankincense curling through the air. The sun spilled through the tall front windows, soft and golden. Peace had returned, not the fragile kind that hides in silence, but the firm peace that settles after the storm has claimed what it came for. Customers returned, slowly at first. Some came for tinctures, others just to see her face. A few whispered what they had heard, but no one dared ask directly. They all felt something had shifted. Celeste didn't explain. She let the work speak. She had cleaned the altar and placed new offerings, a small vial of honey, a white candle in a blue glass jar, and a braid of sweetgrass tied with red thread. In the corner of the shop, she hung her grandmother's framed portrait. Sabina's eyes sparkled with that same knowing look Celeste now saw in the mirror. Tante Vivian came by every few days, never staying long, just enough time to touch Celeste's shoulder and nod, as if to say, "You stood your ground, child. You're ready now." One evening, as the last customer left and Celeste swept the floor, she paused by the altar. She lit the candle and whispered into the stillness.
Thank you for showing me, for letting me see with clear eyes.
A breeze stirred, though the windows were shut. The candle danced, but did not go out. She smiled. Outside, the city hummed with laughter and stories. Life went on, but inside the little shop on Magazine Street, something old had awakened, and something sacred had been restored. Celeste was no longer just Sabina's strong-willed granddaughter. She was the keeper of the tradition now. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more original stories every week.